Ready.
Good. So with us for this lunch and learn today, we have Dave Osborne, the educator from Ripley County. We also have Gina Anderson, the educator from Floyd County. So those two great individuals are going to talk to you about animal control. So Dave, Gina, wherever you guys are ready, we'll let you have it.
Okay, Gina is going to monitor the chat room.
Yep.
What we're going to talk about today is just the basics of animal control. Typically in a master gardener setup, this is about a 3-hour talk. So we're going to use about 40-45 minutes and then open it up for questions. But if you have an animal problem or an animal issue that you really want some more information on, put that in the chat. Put like a mole or a vole or deer or whatever it might be, and we'll make sure we cover that here in about a half an hour. So I want to cover the species that people are interested in. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to discuss legal and safe, environmentally sound ways to minimize animal problems. Whenever we grow garden produce, plant trees or shrubbery in our yard, where we fertilize that, anytime we're putting plants in an animal's environment, we can have issues because actually the plants that we baby and we take care of become very, very much more nutritious. And how an animal knows one shrub is more nutritious than another, scientists have argued that case for years. We don't really know why, but they do. So anytime we do that, we have potential problems. We want to look at ways we can minimize those problems. We also want to give options. When I came to Extension years ago, I came as an outdoorsman and a hunter and a person that trapped, and it's pretty easy. If you had an animal problem, you shot it or trapped it. But not everybody likes that option. So we want to give people other ways. There are several different ways to control nuisance wildlife, and we'll talk about those. We also want to make sure that we're giving people legal ways to do this. What's legal in one county or in a rural area in Indiana may not be legal in a subdivision or a small town or even a larger town or city. I can tell somebody they can go out and shoot an animal that might be legal in Ripley County, but it might not be legal in downtown Madison or Seymour or any places like that. So, and what we don't want to do is have someone get in trouble and have it depend on the judge's mood. We at Purdue do not want to do something to get someone in trouble. So here's the options, and we're going to cover these one at a time. But the first one is exclusion. So can we keep those animals away from our plants, away from our shrubbery, away out of our garden, so that they simply do not become a problem? A lot of times if we're growing a garden in a rural setting where we have woods and different types of habitat around, where we've got deer and coons and possums and skunks and all those types of animals, maybe the best method all the way around is to build a fence, an exclusion fence around that half of an acre and keep the animals out. At CPAC, when we grow trees for research, we fence those tree sections for several years to let the trees get big enough where they don't get browsed on, the bucks don't come in and rub their antlers. And those same kind of fences can be very, very effective for a garden situation. You can use some high snow fence and some basic poles from red cedar or poles that you can cut out of hardwoods on the farm and build a fence fairly economically. So excluding that animal, putting up a perimeter around or a small fence around small trees you plant in the yard can exclude those animals for getting in and creating a problem. So exclusion is one of the primary ones. Those animals typically are there because of food. So if we can exclude the fact that they recognize that as food, then we may not have that much of a problem coming as we move forward. Habitat modification. A lot of animals that we deal with, one of the primary ones that we can modify the habitat and help with that animal is if we have problems with rabbits. Rabbits love to come in and cut down flowers and cut off shrubs and girdle trees and things like that. But that rabbit has to have a thicket somewhere. It has to have heavy cover. So if we simply find out where that animal is staying, and we modify that habitat to make it less conducive for that rabbit to nest and have young and stay away from predators, then we can actually do a good job of keeping that animal at bay. If we have tall grass around our garden, that's a primary habitat for meadow voles. And meadow voles love to come in and eat small plants and eat seeds and things like that. So simply removing that tall grass area and mowing that short can eliminate things like voles. Brush piles. If we cut firewood around the edges of our property and we make brush piles, perfect habitat for things like skunks and coons to come in under there and build a burrow, or rabbits, things like that. So if we have squirrel problems around our house and things, but we have trees overhanging our roof, simply cutting those trees can help eliminate that squirrel from being able to get on the roof or even get inside our house in our attics or crawl spaces. So the other is habitat modification can be something as simple as planting something they don't like. So sometimes you've heard of flowers like chrysanthemums and things like that we can plant around the border of a garden or an area like that to kind of act as a repellent. Sometimes that works. I like to think about planting something they like better than my vegetables. So maybe I plant clover or some type of filter strip that way so that the animals actually like what I planted for them better than they like the vegetables that I planted. So habitat modification is another method that doesn't actually take the animal out. It simply modifies where they live. Frightening. There's a lot of devices out there, the scarecrows, the mylar tape, the flags, firecrackers and noisemakers, distress calls, big eyeballs, bird eyeballs. All those things can work, but here's the deal with frightening. Frightening has a small window of opportunity. So if we go out there and we put that scarecrow in our garden and he stays from April till the next April, and we change his clothes a little bit because his clothes fell off of him, nothing's going to be afraid of that scarecrow that hasn't moved in 365 days. So if we're going to use scaring methods, maybe in that cherry tree, just before the cherries get ripe, we hang the mylar tape and the flags and things like that to scare the birds off, because we want that 1 week or that 2 weeks so we can pick the cherries, they don't. So all of our frightening techniques need to be done in short spurts. We just can't put that out there and let them stay. Jackson County Courthouse, where I grew up, actually has concrete owls on the corner of the building made of concrete, and the birds roost on their heads because they know those owls aren't going anywhere and they're not real. So think about frightening as a technique that you can use. You're just going to use it in small increments and right where you need them to be used. I know some vegetable growers are using the big cannons, the air cannons. Those tend to work to scare animals off in the short term, but they can also really make the neighbors mad. So think about what you're using. In fact, if you've got neighbors for noisemakers, the noisemakers are in the middle of the night in a neighborhood where you wake up the neighbors, there's probably not a frightening device for the neighbors if they're mad that way. Repellents. Lots of different repellents are out there on the market, lots of home remedies. Make sure if we're using repellents, we're using something that's labeled as a repellent. We don't want to use a lot of home remedies. Sometimes those home remedies can have products in them that are more detrimental for the growing of vegetables and growing of the things that we're looking to grow than the solution that they make. Mothballs are a repellent that keeps animals out of old cedar chests, things like that. But I'll give you a mothball story. A commissioner in a county one time read that mothballs in the attic will keep bats out of the attic. Their courthouse was having a real big problem with bats. So he bought several cases of mothballs and opened them and poured them in the attic of the courthouse. And within a day or two, there were people going home sick in the courthouse because of all the fumes. So it might have kept the bats out, but it also might have kept all the people out. So you got to be real careful how you use these products. Ammonia can be extremely strong if used in an indoor situation. Hinder, pepper sprays, things like that. Those tend to work as repellents unless the animal is starved. And then the animal can kind of simply work their way through that the pepper spray or the hinder kind of has an off taste. So these will work in a lot of situations, but we need to make sure we're reading the label and following label instructions. Trapping. So we moved from things that scare the animals, keep the animals out, things like that, but it's not harmful to the animals. So we're just trying to keep the animals from becoming a problem. But at some point, if the animals are a problem and these other techniques haven't worked for us, then we actually need to figure out a way to remove the animal or take care of the nuisance that way. So some of the devices, the trapping devices that we can use for animal removal. The first one is, and the most efficient one, is a snap trap, just a simple mouse trap. They're inexpensive. I have a lot of people over the years in the Master Gardener program say that these were disposable. And I guess what they mean by that is when they catch a mouse in that, they don't even take them out. They just throw the whole thing in the trash. Mice are very easy to take out of these, and they are reusable, but they said no, not in their life. So what you want to do is you actually set these mouse traps, got a little spring in there and a little pedal on here. So you set the mouse trap and you bait the mouse trap. One of the things I'll share with you, and the camera's backwards. That's kind of different. The little pedal here is where the bait goes. If you'll notice, there's a little hook on here, and you actually want to bait these from the back side. I bet a lot of people over the years, they use these, glob it on the top, and when they come out, their trap's clean, but they don't have a mouse in them. So push up a little bit of bait underneath that paddle, underneath the little metal tang here on the trap, and they have to dig around to try to get that out, and that will help them set that trap off and be much more effective. One of the best baits for all these traps, if we're baiting traps, is I like peanut butter, and then a bigger have a heart trap or a live trap, which is next. I like to maybe use peanut butter and a little bit of apple. So snap mouse traps are very effective for mouse size animals. If you find out that these are set off and the bait's gone, but you're not catching the animal, you probably need to step this up to the next size, which are rat traps, because you're probably dealing with a rat size animal, a chipmunk, something like that. So snap traps are very effective. There is a series of live traps, the have a heart traps. They make small mouse trap live traps that actually catch the animal, and when the trap's set off, that animal's in here and it's alive. Live traps throw you another curve. You got to figure out what you're going to do with that animal once you've caught it. So when you trap and that animal's alive in there, what are you going to do with it? Now, I've heard people that use live traps because they don't want to use a snap trap to hurt an animal. Then I ask them, well, how do you take care of the animal once it's in the live trap? And I've had people that didn't want to hurt the animal say, well, I throw it in the freezer until they don't move anymore. Folks, that is not a humane solution. That snap trap is 100 times more humane than throwing the trap in the freezer or throwing it in a bucket of water. That animal is dispatched in a snap trap in a matter of seconds. You throw this animal in a freezer, it could be hours. So you've got to have a game plan for a live trap. If you catch a coon in a live trap, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to dispatch them? Where are you going to move them to? You're legally allowed to move animals most of the time within a county's borders, but when you release them on private property, you have to have permission to do so. You are not legally allowed to release them on county property or state-owned properties. So taking them to the state park taking them to the county park, that's not legal. So live traps can be very effective, but you've got to have a game plan. What am I going to do with that live animal when we're done? Another little hint, you see this little live trap, it's a mouse live trap, it's black. Most of the habit heart traps for coons, possums, skunks, things like that, come as a wire cage material. You will find that that trap's 100 times more effective if you cover that with an old rug, an old blanket, tar paper, something like that, so that that trap is dark. And when you bait that, that animal's going in a dark area that they feel safe in, more than that open mesh wire. So think about that. Those are two traps that a lot of people use. I'll recommend those traps to about anybody that calls that has a problem that wants to remove the animals. The next couple sets of traps, not so much, especially the conibear or lethal traps. Those are big square traps made out of metal with heavy springs on them. And that conibear trap doesn't know if it's a groundhog coming through the conibear or your dachshund or your cat. And when it says they're lethal, they're just as lethal to pets as they are to the wildlife. And the one thing we want to really be careful on, and I've got pets, I know how much they're part of the family. We want to be extremely careful in how we set those traps. So if we're going to use those as a landowner, most of the time I do not recommend a landowner use traps because they need to have some experience using them. But you've got to be extremely careful where you set those. So conibear, you see down another leg hold traps or steel traps that catch them by the foot. That's another trap that's the same way. Knowing how to set those and knowing how to do it in a humane way is very, very important. I skipped mold traps. I'm going to cover them at the end. The next one is glue boards. And I'll show you a package of glue boards. I actually helped do some of the research for glue boards when we were at Purdue back in the 90s. And because of what I saw and some of the work I did with them, they can be effective. But also, if you use glue boards because you want to be more humane to animals, this is not the way to go. When animals get stuck in a glue board, a lot of times they will chew themselves up. And they're, in my opinion, a lot less humane than just a simple snap trap. So I do not typically recommend glue boards for almost anything. Snares are kind of like the conibear. An animal, a pet, something like that, get caught in a snare. They're going to fight those snares. They're going to tear themselves up. And if snares are used, you really probably ought to leave that to an expert. The last trap I'll share with you is because it's one of the most calls I get for wildlife damage is with moles. So a spike trap, the Victor spike trap, is one of the most effective traps, especially in our soil types. They're heavy clay soil. These traps are better to be used early in the spring. And when I say early in the spring, I mean like right now. If you walk across your yard now, you see that the runs, when we had that rain about 4 or 5 days ago, the mole runs are right at the surface. They're very shallow, very exposed, and they want them shallow so that these traps work effectively. One of the things about these traps is learning how to set them so that you set them right on the run is important, and to set them light enough where they go off, because some of these traps need a little bit of tweaking so that they go off when that animal moves underneath the trap and moves in through the trap, that they push that paddle up and they set off. The other thing is, you see these little spikes. That animal can be spiked through the side of its fur and be caught underneath the ground. And if you just pull this trap up thinking you're going to have that animal stuck to this trap, that's not really how it works. So if you see a trap set off like this, what you want to do is you want to dig that trap up. You want to spade that trap up out of the ground, because you might have that animal down underneath that trap, and you might catch him by digging him out. So it's important to use those mole traps I like to set 3 or 4 of them per acre to be more effective at getting them. The earlier on moles, the better. Trapping a mole right now that's a female mole that's pregnant means in about 5 to 6 weeks, that mole's not going to become 5 or 6 moles. So getting on them early, getting on them as soon as they come up from their deeper burrows. They're up there to find grubs. They're up there to find worms, other larvae. They're insectivores. So that old adage that the mole went through my flower bed and ate all my tulip bulbs, the mole did not eat any of your plant material. Moles are there only to eat insects. What happens is, though, that meadow voles and field mice have learned to come behind the mole and eat all the plant material. So it's not the mole that's eating your plant material or your seeds in your gardens and things like that. It's the voles and the field mice that are coming in behind the moles. And field mice and meadow voles, if you're losing seed and plant material, are back to the snap traps. So any questions on what we've covered so far? I've got a few more topics, but Gina, do we have any questions? Or you can unmute and ask them if you need to.
There are no questions in the chat box.
Okay. Anybody want to unmute, have any questions? Again, if you've got a species you in particular, put that in the chat box because we'll start talking species here in just a minute. All right, shooting. So trapping's one way that you actually physically remove the animal. The other is shooting. It may be legal in a lot of areas, but there are some areas, residential areas, small towns that have local ordinances against shooting. So you don't really, you got to check your local ordinances to make sure it's legal to shoot. A shotgun is one of those things that have a wide pattern, a short distance. You want to typically use that when the animal's in the open. I've had a lot of stories over the years about farmers shooting the side of their barn or shooting the side of their house. You want to make sure you're doing this in a safe manner, and that you understand how to safely use, a gun, a shotgun, a rifle, pellet rifle, any of those. Rifles, shooting with rifles or pellet rifles, you got a little bit longer distance, but you've got one projectile, so you have to have a little bit more precision and the ability to do that. And in some of our rifles, the bullet may travel up to several miles, so you want to use caution. Some of the high-powered rifles that people want to shoot coyotes and things like that with, some of those rifles are up to 2 miles. So most of us live within an area that there are several homes and residences within 1 mile to 2 miles of where we are. So you got to be very careful and very safe to use a rifle. Pistols, it's down here as an option. I've shot guns my entire life and feel that I'm a pretty good shooter with shotguns and rifles. And I know I can't hit the side of a barn with a pistol. So now maybe dispatching animals in traps or things like that, a pistol could be very effective. But accuracy can be a real problem with pistols. And then there's bow and arrows. Bow and arrows tend to be legal in some areas where maybe firearms aren't. But you've got to be pretty proficient with a bow and arrow to use it to control nuisance wildlife. Predator introduction. And so I put this up there, and it's kind of one of those things that I like to watch people's face when I can see them face to face, because when I say introducing predators, so it's not like if white-tailed deer are feeding in our gardens, we're going to go out there and release timber wolves and grizzly bears. So, not that out west they didn't release some timber wolves and things like that. Have become a real nuisance themselves. But what we're talking about is basically, how many of you have been around a farm? Almost every farm in Ripley County had barn cats. And the farmer dealt with barn cats, would help feed barn cats and put up with barn cats because barn cats took care of rats and mice and voles and sometimes birds. So that was a predator. They introduced a predator in and of a barn cat to help control nuisance animals within the barn or around the barnstead. If we've got a garden and we've got dogs, maybe we put the dog kennel right around the garden where that dog barking if animals come in is a frightening tactic as well as kind of a predator. They may not be actually physically removing the animals, but that predator can sometimes keep animals from coming into the yard or coming into the garden. Sometimes predators can create more chaos than they do good. I've got a couple dogs and have had dogs over the years that were really, really good mole dogs. But I had a bird dog that looked like a one bottom potato plow went across my yard because it would stick its nose in a mole run and turn that entire mole run over for 50 or 60 yards and do 10 times the damage that the mole did to begin with. So it usually caught the mole, which meant after the yard healed, that mole wasn't coming back, but it probably wasn't the best trade-off in the world. So the predator introduction can be very effective. Like I said, for years and years, about every farm around Ripley County always had barn cats to do this same thing. So any questions about those techniques? And we're going to talk about some animals, and we'll talk about how each technique could be used with these animals if I don't have any specific questions about animals.
There's no questions in the chat box.
All right, so let's go over this is a cottontail rabbit. It can have up to 3 litters a year. Some years in a little more southerly locations can maybe have 4 litters per year. They're mainly browsers or foragers. They love green plants. They love vegetable plants because they're grown and they're fertilized. They love the fertility level of plants. The way to know that you're dealing with this individual is to look for tracks, especially in your garden where you've just planted small bedding plants. And if you look at your plant, when rabbits actually eat your plants will be clipped off looking like you took a pair of scissors and cut them off. Be very, very clean cuts. The easiest way to get rid of this animal, you can trap each individual animal. You can remove them that way with traps. They're effective to be trapped with, using peanut butter and apples. But if you simply remove their cover, no brush piles, no thicket cover, rose areas or bramble areas, and keep that area clean of your garden and give you a nice tight mowed area around your garden. These animals will succumb to owls at night, hawks during the day, coyotes, foxes, bobcats, every animal, every predator animal out there. This is their filet mignon. So the reason they survive is going to be based on cover. So if we remove cover, we can remove this problem in a very, very quick manner because most rabbits do not see their first birthday. So 80 to 85% of rabbits will never see 1 year old, and at least half the rabbits will never reproduce. So once we take that cover away, the population of rabbits will decline in a very, very short order. So rabbits tend to be fairly easy to control, simply with the habitat manipulation. You can trap them, but if they've got adequate habitat to keep having young, and they can have three litters a year, you won't hardly stay ahead of them with just trapping. So the combination, or integrated pest management, IPM is what we call it, a combination of habitat manipulation and trapping, and you can exclude these fairly easy. You'll want to use a wire, like a chicken wire or wire mesh. Nylon type fencing will not work with rabbits. They'll just cut their way right through it. So nylon, plastic, things like that will not work effectively for rabbits. So that's the first species. Next one, we'll look at the mice. And this category or this group of animals are the mice and the voles, or the smaller animals. Again, habitat. Voles like to have cover above their heads, so they can become a real problem in no-till type of forest. Anytime you have grass that's more than about 5 or 6 inches tall, voles can move in and tunnel underneath that cover. If you go out right now and walk the edge of your garden area or the edge of your yard, you'll know you have vole issues because you'll see a little tunnel system that's right into the ground, right through the grass, but it's actually on the top of the ground. And if you look at that tunnel system real close, you'll see little 1/2-inch pieces or blades of grass that are lining that runway. Voles actually put up hay. They clip the grass off. They clip it into small bits. They carry it in their mouth into their burrow, and they actually pack huge volumes of grass underground to make it through the winter. So voles are a hay maker. They make hay and they drop this all along their runs. So a simple way to get rid of voles is to go where their runs are, use a little snap trap with a little peanut butter in there, and voles are very easy to catch with snap traps. One of the neat ways is to make them dark is to actually set 2 or 3 traps in their runs and then put a 5-gallon bucket over the top. That'll keep it dark and make those traps even that much more effective. So voles and mice, snap traps. There are ability around different barns and things like that to utilize some poisons, some chemical poisoning. Tomcat type of mouse control is very effective. There are several different brands out on the market. The one thing you want to be careful of on controlling mice with chemicals is to make sure you're keeping that out of reach of your cats or your dogs, your pets, things like that. The products used now tend to be very, very safe for dogs and cats. If they get a little or ingest a little poison, a little bit of vitamin K or a shot of vitamin K should take care of them. Plus, what it takes to kill a mouse, it would take 10 times or 100 times that for a small dog or a small cat. So there's a big safety margin in these products, but you still want to make sure you're keeping it out of reach of your pets. There are different ways to do that, different publications that show you how to put it in out of the way places. And the other thing I'll tell you, if you're going to try a poisoning deal in a livestock barn, or you got goats, or the chicken house where you've got eggs and chicken feed and things like that, is to make sure they have water, because they'll ingest enough poison with one feeding as long as they have water there available. So you make a water available where they can eat and drink. Most of the time they'll actually ingest enough food to do themselves in one feeding. So that's the meadow vole. He's a short, dumpy, mouse-looking thing with his tail shorter than his body. So the first one was a field mouse. There's 2 or 3 different types of field mice, well, white-footed mice and deer mice. But this is the meadow vole, V-O-L-E. He gets a lot of, the mole gets a lot of complaints about eating the tulip bulbs and things like that I talked about earlier, when this is the guy that's actually doing that. So here's the mole. I get more calls every year about mole problems. Again, moles are insectivores. They are there to eat earthworms, grubs, other insect larvae. They tend to be very territorial. The mother mole will only put up with her young for a short period of time. They're always active. They're always wherever the layer of moisture is, so that the earthworms are at that layer. In the winter, they will sleep or sleep for some periods of time, but they're always active. They're always searching for food. So as soon as we get that first warm rain, like we got about a week ago, they come up very, very shallow, and they become very much more accessible for trapping. There are some products, Talpid and some other products with mole worms that you can put in their burrow, and if they eat them, it will help control them. They're fairly expensive, so if you're going to put those into mole runs, you may want to flag them, and in 2 days dig them up to see if they are gone. If they're not gone, move them somewhere else, because those are fairly expensive, but they can be effective. But the most effective way to take care of moles is with the trap. They again, they're pregnant right now. They actually will breed very early in the season, a lot of times in February, and a lot of times they'll have young in early April. So every mole, every female mole you catch right now is 3 or 4 moles you're not going to have in May and June. So. And the last one we'll talk about, and then I'll open it up for questions, is the white-tailed deer. It is by dollars, it is the most nuisance, most highly financial impact in Indiana on not only vegetable type products, but agronomic crops, specialty crops, nurseries, lots of insurance claims paid out on deer vehicle accidents. So the white-tailed deer, from a wildlife conflict and nuisance area, is the top of the list, especially from the financial aspect. They have become very, very public place. They're acclimated to living in downtown Indianapolis. They find a very comfortable living right around subdivisions and houses where people are in and out all the time. They get very used to what is normal. So there's almost nowhere in Indiana that is immune to white-tailed deer damage. Our cities and larger urban areas have special seasons they've created for urban wildlife control for the deer, and they have a very, very long season. The DNR has provided out-of-season control permits for ag folks that have deer damage. So there are ways out there that you can actually have year-long control of white-tailed deer if you've got a nuisance problem or they're causing damage. One of the most effective ways in a rural area or about any area, if you're going to have a garden or a larger garden area, is simply fencing that garden. If these become a problem, that fencing will protect 99% of the time, and it's effective, and in the long run, probably very, very cost effective. So white-tailed deer breed one time a year. The average is a white-tailed deer has 2 fawns a year. The long hunting season opens from October and runs through the first part of January. So where it's available and where it's legal, simply having hunters come in and help you control the population. The more you knock that population in the head, the less animals you have, the less interaction and damage you're going to have. So that's the whitetail. This is the kind of a picture to talk about nuisance birds. Starlings tend to be very much of a nuisance, especially in towns and cities where they have lots of silver maple that are pruned so that they grow thousands of branches and thousands of roost areas. But lately, in the past few years, more and more of these are becoming problems in barns and equipment sheds. And exclusion is the primary way for these. If they're getting in and out of your equipment shed, it's because you're leaving doors open. So there are some nets that you can put, because most of the time they'll fly in and out of those barns at the top of the door area, but you can put some netting up to exclude these. You can seal off with netting between your soffit area under your roof and the side of your walls from them getting in the building. But they're simply looking for a safe place to roost. And they become more and more of a problem. There are a few chemical treatments, but most of the time those are not going to be issued to the general public. They're going to take a wildlife control agency or business to actually file the right papers and actually get the products to be able to take care of some of these on a large scale basis. Some other birds that can be a problem, if you've got a wood-sided house, woodpeckers can become a problem. It's amazing how many times I've gone out on woodpecker damage calls and I get there and it's right next to a bird feeder and a soot feeder, which is made to feed woodpeckers. So they're attracting woodpeckers to their home, and then the woodpeckers destroying their home. And so the first thing we talk about is get rid of the feed for the woodpeckers, but they say, well, I like the rest of the birds. Well, a woodpecker is going to eat what the rest of the birds do. So you kind of got to live with that, if woodpeckers become a problem. Canada geese can be a real nuisance to yards, golf courses, ag crops around lakes and ponds. And there are some permits available through the state to control Canada geese and to control their nesting success. If you have some problem with geese, simply go to Indiana DNR and look up goose control permits, and it'll give you a publication how to get the permit and how to take care of some of the goose problems you might have on your own personal properties. So that's all I have from the perspective of the slide presentation. Do I have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat box yet.
Okay.
Dave, let me ask you one, and this is something I think I may have told you about once that I've been dealing with, and I know I've got some clients. I'm sure Kyle and Gina have clients in similar situations. So I'm in a suburban neighborhood, and I've got a problem with groundhogs. I've used have-a-heart traps before. I know farmers who have used have-a-heart traps before. What would your recommendation be for the average homeowner that's dealing with a groundhog tearing up everything right around the base of their deck and around their sheds? You know, I could catch them, but obviously I'm not going to move them anywhere because the farmers, you know, if I moved them to a farm field or a woodland anywhere, they wouldn't like that. What would your recommendation be if I do catch that animal? How would I humanely dispose of it?
All right, where it's legal and you can actually take that animal in the trap if you need to go to where it's legal. Dispatching an animal like that with a small caliber rifle or pistol like a 22 is the most humane way to do that. You know, have-a-heart traps are very effective with groundhogs. The other thing is sometimes we simply need to look at the construction of our home. And a lot of times the little vents that vent the crawl space of our home, maybe a groundhog at one time dug through that and bent the levers all up and took the screening out from behind that. So now it's an open hole to get under your house. Well, any animal, a cat, a skunk, a groundhog is going to take advantage of, you know, free room and board in a place that they can get in. So sometimes it's the exclusion part of this whole puzzle is, can we make that foundation? Can we make the barn? Can we make the crawl space inaccessible? So once we get the animal out, if we don't do anything for why the animal was in there in the first place, then we really don't take care of the problem. So it's a kind of a two-stage problem. Get the animal out to begin with, but then come back and seal that area or fix that area so that the animal can't get in again. So it's kind of a two-prong approach. But again, you got to have that game plan. Where am I going to take it? How am I going to get rid of it? If I catch it, and I don't feel like I can do that, do I know someone I can call that will do that?
Thanks, Dave. And that's often the battle with our clients, is determining if it's a nuisance enough to spend some money for a professional, especially for those that are perhaps elderly or don't have access to, like you said, a 22 or something like that. Good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, there are some companies around that do a really good job, that have a lot of good common sense. But you've got to realize that I asked a couple weeks ago of a guy that I was talking to that does that, and his going rate right now for groundhogs, coons, and skunks is $75, and that's once he catches the animal. And then there's a trip fee on top of that. So it's not unheard of to spend $150 to $200 to remove one animal. Have-a-heart trap at Rural King or Orscheln's or wherever you might go is about $30 or $40. They're not hard to catch, but then again, you've got to have that game plan. So I'm not the person that's going to pay somebody $200 to come get a coon, but I've got an experience with trapping and wildlife background. So there are other ways to do that. If you can catch them when the animal's out and gone and seal up so they can't get back in, then they got to go find somewhere else. So sometimes exclusion can be done when we know that animal's out. A lot of times, you know, we can scare that animal off if we do the right thing. We can actually put some different kinds of structures in place that they can come out, but they can't get back in. There's funnels and things like that we can put over holes. So if anybody has a specific question with that, feel free to reach out to your extension educators. A lot of times they'll reach out to me and say, hey, here's the deal. And I'll talk to anybody about wildlife or ponds or nuisance conflict anytime. So we'll try to help folks out, but sometimes those professionals are who you need to call, because maybe you're in a town where you can't shoot, you can't do some of these things. So that professional is there. And we have 2 or 3 here in Southeast Indiana. So.
There are no questions in the chat box, but I'll ask one. It's not about landscaping, but it is about nuisance animals, because I had a guy call me the other day. He was very concerned in our urban area about the black vultures attacking his pets.
I'm actually in the process of working with a grad student on black vulture graduate work, trying to convince Indiana DNR that when a person has a problem, they simply just get to take care of the problem. We also got to convince the federal Fish and Wildlife Service, because it's a 2-prong approach. Black vultures are not your typical turkey buzzard. They are aggressive. If you've ever watched some of the African films where the hyenas are there and these vultures are running hyenas off of kill, this is the attitude black vultures have. So a black vulture could be detrimental to a small animal, small cats, small dogs. They are well equipped animals to grab small prey like that. Most of the time, they are problems with ranchers, especially those that have sheep that are lambing, goats with small goats. Even the most egregious that we've seen here in Southeast Indiana and Southern Indiana is that they'll actually wait till a calf hits the ground and actually start and peck the eyes out of a calf and start taking the rectum out of a calf. Most of the time, the mother trying to get them away from a calf tramples the calf, and they can kill calves. I lost 7 calves in the last 2 years here in Ripley County that I've actually gone out and looked at. So black vultures are a problem. We're trying to get there are some permits that are available. The federal permit system right now takes about a week to get your permit. So I know when I called the DNR 3 years ago with this problem, the first thing I was told to just tell them to bring the cows in and calve in the barn. And I said, you really don't understand beef production in Indiana, because I'm not going to tell any beef producer that, because that just doesn't make sense to how we do business. But we've moved forward. DNR is a lot better to work with right now with the producers, but there still is a federal permit that needs to happen. But yeah, black vultures are a problem. There are some solutions out there that other states have, but until we get the legal 1, 2, 3 and the legal guidelines through in Indiana, some of that stuff is just not as open to our producers as it should be.
All right. Tracy, you asked about getting the link to the recording, and there will be a recording posted. So yes, you can rewatch all this information and take some notes. Dave, I don't see other questions. So does anybody have any questions that you want to unmute and ask? You've baffled them, Dave. They just don't know what to do. There's so many options.
Again, a lot of people don't have a lot of questions until it hits close to home. If you're talking, you're having conversations and people bring it up, just contact your local extension office and we'll work through our system to get you the right answers and to make sure you're on the right side of legal. There are things that's legal to do in Osgood, Indiana, that's not legal to do in Aurora and Lawrenceburg. So that's just the reality of where we live and how we live in different places. But get a hold of us and we'll get you some answers, and that's what we do. We're kind of the answer people. So.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. We appreciate your information today. So any other questions? If not, we'll